The message arrived on a Tuesday morning when Admiral Henry Carter was drinking his second cup of coffee. He stood in the command center of Earth's orbital station Freedom and watched the alien symbols translate themselves on the screen in front of him. The words were simple enough, but the threat behind them was clear. The Galactic Council knew about humanity now, and they were not happy about it. Commander Lisa Bennett walked into the room carrying a datapad, and her face told Henry everything he needed to know before she even spoke. She had been his second-in-command for 5 years, and he trusted her judgment more than anyone else in the fleet. She stopped beside him and looked at the screen with the same expression he probably had on his own face. The translation finished, and Henry read it again to make sure he understood correctly. The Council was giving humanity 30 days to surrender their entire space fleet and accept Council rule. If they refused, then the Council would come and take what they wanted by force. It was not a negotiation or an invitation. It was an ultimatum delivered with all the grace of a hammer to the face. Henry turned away from the screen and looked out the observation window at Earth below. The blue and white planet looked peaceful from up here, but he knew that peace was about to be tested in ways humanity had never experienced before. They had been alone in space for 200 years since the invention of faster-than-light travel. Now the neighbors had finally noticed them, and those neighbors were not friendly. Lisa cleared her throat and spoke quietly. She knew better than to interrupt Henry when he was thinking. But time was not on their side. They had 30 days to decide the future of the entire human race. She pulled up more data on her pad and began reading the details that the translation software had pulled from the message. The Galactic Council represented 49 different alien species spread across thousands of star systems. They had rules and laws that every species had to follow. New species were expected to join peacefully and accept Council authority over their military and their expansion into space. Species that refused were dealt with harshly. The message did not say what that meant exactly, but Henry could guess. He walked back to his command chair and sat down heavily. His joints ached today, and he felt every one of his 58 years. He had spent his entire career preparing Earth's defenses against unknown threats from space. Now that threat had arrived, and it was bigger than anything he had imagined. 300 alien warships were coming in 15 days, and they expected humanity to bow down without a fight. What the Council did not know was that humanity had a secret, a very big secret that had been hidden in the outer reaches of the solar system for the last 50 years. While the aliens thought humans were still playing with primitive plasma drives and chemical rockets, the truth was very different. Earth scientists had cracked something that no other species in the galaxy had managed to achieve. They had learned how to use dark matter as a power source deep in the Kuiper Belt beyond Neptune's orbit. There was a research station that did not appear on any public records. Station Kepler was home to 3,000 scientists and engineers who had devoted their lives to Project Shadowfall. The project had one goal, and that goal was to build warships that could defend Earth against any threat. Ships that used technology so advanced that even the Galactic Council would think twice before attacking. Dr. Richard Hayes stood in the observation deck of Station Kepler and looked at the ship, floating in space outside. He was 42 years old, with gray hair at his temples and permanent dark circles under his eyes from too many sleepless nights. He had led Project Shadowfall for the last 12 years, and this moment was what he had been working toward all that time. The ship outside was called the EDS Phantom, and it was the first of 12 dark matter warships that Earth had built. It did not look like a normal ship because it was not made entirely of normal matter. The hull seemed to shimmer and bend light around it in ways that hurt to look at directly. The ship existed partially in normal space and partially in the dark matter dimension that most species did not even know existed. Lieutenant Karen Price stood beside Richard and stared at the Phantom with a mixture of excitement and fear. She was 29 years old and the best pilot in the entire solar system. She had trained for 3 years to fly this ship, and today was finally the day she would take it out for its first real test flight. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Richard smiled at her question about the ship's name. The Phantom was just the first. There were 11 more ships in various stages of completion, scattered across hidden shipyards in the asteroid belt and the outer planets. Each one was named after something that inspired fear or respect. Phantom, Wraith, Revenant, Spectre, Shadow, Ghost, Reaper, Banshee, Nightmare, Void, Eclipse, and Singularity. 12 ships that could manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Ships that did not fire weapons in the traditional sense but instead bent gravity and twisted space and time to destroy their enemies. Ships that could appear and disappear at will by shifting between dimensions. Ships that made every vessel in the Council fleet look like toys by comparison. Back on Earth, President Helen Morrison was meeting with her cabinet and the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Situation Room, deep under the White House. The argument had been going on for 2 hours and showed no signs of stopping. Some people wanted to negotiate with the Council and try to find a peaceful solution. Others wanted to show force immediately and prove that humanity would not be pushed around. Henry Carter attended the meeting remotely from his station in orbit. His face appeared on the large screen at the end of the conference table, and he listened to everyone argue before finally speaking up. His suggestion was simple: let the Council come to Earth. Let them bring their fleet and make their threats in person. Then show them exactly what humanity had built while they were not paying attention. The room went quiet when Henry finished speaking. President Morrison looked at him through the screen and asked if he was sure about this plan. Starting a war with the Galactic Council could mean the end of everything humanity had built. Henry nodded and told her that he was sure. The Council was coming whether they wanted them to or not. Better to control the situation and show strength from the beginning. The vote was close, but Henry's plan won by a narrow margin. Earth would not surrender and would not run away. They would face the Council head-on and let the aliens see what humans could do when they were pushed into a corner. President Morrison authorized Henry to deploy the dark matter fleet when the time was right. The message went out to Station Kepler and the other hidden facilities across the solar system. All 12 dark matter warships were to be made ready for combat operations within 10 days. Crews were briefed on their mission, and pilots began running final simulations. The secret that humanity had kept for 50 years was about to be revealed to the galaxy. Henry sent a response message to the Galactic Council. It was short and polite but firm. Humanity would not surrender. The Council was welcome to send representatives to discuss peaceful relations, but Earth would remain independent. If the Council wanted a war, then humanity would give them one they would never forget. The message was sent and the countdown began. In 15 days, the Council fleet would arrive at Earth expecting to find a primitive species ready to submit. Instead, they would find something that would change the balance of power in the entire galaxy. They would find that humans had learned to master the invisible force that made up most of the universe. They would find that humanity had turned darkness itself into a weapon. The Council fleet arrived exactly when they said they would, and they did not try to hide their presence. 300 warships emerged from jump space at the edge of the solar system and spread out in a formation designed to intimidate anyone watching. The ships were massive and covered in weapons that could level entire cities from orbit. At the center of the fleet was the largest ship anyone from Earth had ever seen. The Celestial Authority was 5 kilometers long and bristled with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. It was the flagship of High Counselor Vexthar, who had conquered 47 different species during his long career. Vexthar was a reptilian alien who stood 3 meters tall with scales that shimmered like oil and eyes that showed no mercy. He had come to Earth expecting humanity to surrender the moment they saw his fleet. Captain Daniel Wright watched the alien ships from his station on the Orbital Defense Platform Watchtower. He was 35 years old and had been in the Defense Force for 12 years. He had never seen anything like this before, and part of him wanted to order every human ship to attack immediately. But his orders were clear: wait and watch. Let the aliens make the first move. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster, sat at her console tracking every ship in the Council fleet. Her fingers flew across the controls as she cataloged weapon signatures and shield frequencies. The aliens were not even trying to hide what they had. They wanted Earth to see exactly how outgunned humanity appeared to be. Amy looked up at Daniel and asked if they should deploy the conventional fleet. Daniel shook his head and told her to hold position. The conventional fleet consisted of 200 human warships that used plasma drives and nuclear missiles. They were good ships and their crews were well trained, but they would last maybe 10 minutes against the Council fleet. That was not the point, though. The conventional fleet was just a distraction. The real defense of Earth was waiting in the shadows. On the bridge of the Celestial Authority, High Counselor Vexithar reviewed intelligence reports about humanity with barely concealed contempt. The report showed that humans had only achieved faster than light travel 200 years ago. Their weapons were primitive, and their ships were slow. Everything suggested this would be the easiest conquest of his career. He turned to his aide and laughed about how quickly this would be over. Klix was an insectoid alien who served as Vexthar's personal assistant. He had compound eyes that could see in multiple spectrums, and right now those eyes were showing him something that made him nervous. The humans had not responded to any hails. Their stations were quiet and their ships had not moved. It was unusual behavior for a species that was about to be conquered. Most species either attacked immediately or begged for mercy. Humans were doing neither. Vexthar dismissed Klix's concerns and ordered a communication channel open to Earth. He wanted to hear the humans beg before he destroyed their pathetic fleet. Admiral Henry Carter's face appeared on the viewscreen, and Vexthar was surprised to see the human looked calm. There was no fear in those eyes, no desperation, just a quiet confidence that irritated Vexthar more than he wanted to admit. Henry spoke first, and his voice was polite but firm. He welcomed the council to the solar system and suggested they might want to see a demonstration before any discussions began. Vexthar's scales rippled with anger at the audacity of this primitive creature. He snarled at Henry and demanded immediate surrender, or he would begin destroying Earth's orbital stations one by one. Henry's expression did not change at all. He simply nodded to someone off-screen and said that Commander Bennett would provide the demonstration they needed to see. Then the screen went dark and Vexthar was left staring at his own reflection. For a moment he felt something he had not experienced in decades. A tiny flicker of doubt. In the Kuiper Belt, far beyond Pluto's orbit, Commander Lisa Bennett stood in the command center of the EDS Wraith. Around her station, 11 other dark matter warships powered up their drives simultaneously. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Space itself seemed to scream as the ships activated technology that should not exist. On every sensor screen in the Council fleet, impossible readings began appearing. 12 signatures that registered as holes in reality itself. Ships that bent space-time around them and radiated power levels that exceeded anything the Council had in their databases. The readings made no sense. Matter could not do what these vessels were doing. It violated every known law of physics. Klix stumbled backward from his console and his voice came out as a high-pitched, chittering sound. He told Vexthar that the power readings were off every scale they had. The human ships were using dark matter as a power source. That was impossible. Every advanced species in the galaxy had tried to harness dark matter and every single one had failed. The energy was too unstable and too dangerous to control. Vexthar felt his confidence crumbling, but he refused to show weakness in front of his crew. He demanded a tactical analysis and asked what exactly he was looking at. His tactical officer worked frantically at multiple consoles trying to make sense of the data. The officer reported that the human vessels had mass that fluctuated wildly. One moment they registered as small corvettes. The next moment they showed mass equivalent to a small moon. On the EDS, Phantom Lieutenant Karen Price sat in the pilot's chair and felt the ship respond to her thoughts. The neural interface connected her directly to the dark matter drive, and she could feel the power flowing through the vessel. It was like riding lightning. She opened a communication channel to Admiral Carter and reported that she had the Council fleet's full attention. Henry's voice came back steady and calm. He told Karen to show them what the Phantom could do, but keep it non-lethal. This was a demonstration, not a massacre. Karen smiled and her fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease. The dark matter drive did not just move the ship through normal space. It allowed manipulation of space-time itself on a local level. Karen activated the gravitational lensing system, and reality bent around the Phantom. The Council flagship suddenly lurched backward, as if grabbed by an invisible hand. The massive dreadnought slid through space despite its engines firing at full thrust, trying to hold position. Around the flagship, 3 smaller destroyers were caught in artificial gravity wells and began spinning like toys in a bathtub. Alarms blared across the bridge of the Celestial Authority, and crew members shouted reports that all sounded like bad news. The defensive systems were offline. The shield generators were being dampened by something they could not detect. The helm reported they had lost all control, and the ship was being pushed backward by a force that should not exist. Vexithar gripped his command chair so hard his claws dug into the metal. He demanded to know how this was possible. They had not detected any weapons fire. No missiles had been launched. No energy beams had been fired. Yet somehow the humans were controlling his ship like it was nothing. His tactical officer's voice shook when he explained that the humans were not using traditional weapons. Dr. Richard Hayes appeared on the view screens of every council ship at once. His face was calm and professional as he explained in simple terms what humanity had achieved. The dark matter warships did not fire conventional weapons. They manipulated the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Gravity, space-time, even quantum probability fields. The Council's shields were designed to stop energy and matter. They were completely useless against what humanity was doing. To emphasize the point, the remaining 11 dark matter warships appeared around the Council fleet in a perfect sphere. They had not jumped through space or traveled from the Kuiper Belt. They had been there the whole time, hiding in the dark matter dimension, watching and waiting. Now they revealed themselves, and the Council fleet found itself completely surrounded. Clix's voice was barely a whisper as he stared at the sensor readings. The humans had been there the entire time, invisible and undetectable, watching the Council fleet arrive and position itself. The aliens had walked right into a trap without even knowing it existed. Every advantage they thought they had was an illusion. Lisa Bennett's voice came through on an open channel that every ship in both fleets could hear. She addressed Vexithar directly, and her tone was respectful but firm. The Council had come with 300 ships to intimidate humanity. She wanted to make something very clear. Any single one of Earth's 12 dark matter warships could reduce the entire Council fleet to scrap metal in under 5 minutes. That was not a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. Vexithar looked at his tactical displays and saw his mighty fleet surrounded by vessels that his weapons could barely target, and his shields could not stop. The power readings alone were enough to tell him that the human was not exaggerating. He had conquered 47 species during his career. He had destroyed fleets and shattered civilizations. But right now, sitting in his command chair, surrounded by human warships, he felt something he had not experienced in his entire life. He felt genuine fear. Admiral Henry Carter watched the Council fleet from his command center and allowed himself a small smile. The aliens had come expecting to crush a primitive species and instead found themselves surrounded by weapons they did not understand. Now came the important part. He needed to make sure the Council understood that humanity was not interested in war but would not hesitate to defend itself if pushed. He opened a channel to Vexithar and spoke in a tone that was neither threatening nor apologetic. Henry explained that Earth had no desire to fight the Council or any of its member species. Humanity simply wanted to be left alone to manage its own affairs. The dark matter warships were defensive weapons built to ensure that no one could force Earth to submit to foreign rule. If the Council could accept that, then perhaps they could find a way to coexist peacefully. Vexithar's face appeared on the screen, and the reptilian alien looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. His scales had lost some of their shimmer, and his eyes showed confusion mixed with anger. He asked Henry how humanity had managed to achieve something that every other species had failed to accomplish. Dark matter was supposed to be impossible to harness. Entire civilizations had destroyed themselves trying. Dr. Richard Hayes took over the explanation, and his voice carried the patience of a teacher addressing a confused student. He told Vexithar that most species had approached dark matter with the wrong mindset. They tried to control it through brute force and containment. Humanity had taken a different approach. Instead of fighting against dark matter's natural properties, they learned to work with them. It was like the difference between damming a river and learning to sail with the current. Richard pulled up holographic displays that showed the basic principles behind the dark matter drive. He did not reveal any of the critical details that would allow the Council to replicate the technology, but he gave them enough information to understand what they were facing. The ships did not carry dark matter as fuel. Instead, they created a resonance field that allowed them to tap directly into the dark matter that existed everywhere in space. It was an infinite power source that would never run out. Click spoke up from his position beside Vexithar and asked about the weapon systems. If the ships did not fire conventional weapons, then how exactly did they fight? Lisa Bennett answered that question by demonstrating on one of the Council's smaller cruisers. She selected a ship at random and locked the Wraith's gravitational systems onto it. The cruiser suddenly began to compress as artificial gravity crushed it from all sides. The hull buckled and groaned under pressure that increased exponentially with each passing second. Just when it looked like the ship would implode completely, Lisa released the gravitational lock. The cruiser sprang back to its normal shape, but the crew inside would need weeks to repair all the damage. Not a single shot had been fired. Karen Price added her own demonstration from the Phantom. She activated the temporal distortion field, and reality around another Council destroyer began to slow down. From the destroyer's perspective, everything seemed normal, but to outside observers, the ship appeared to be frozen in time. Crew members moved like statues. Energy weapons fired, but the beams crawled through space at a fraction of their normal speed. After 5 seconds, Karen deactivated the field and time snapped back to normal. The Council fleet remained absolutely still as the implications sank in. These human warships could crush them with gravity or freeze them in time or bend space to make their shields useless. Traditional military tactics meant nothing against enemies who could manipulate the fundamental laws of physics. It was not a fight. It would be a slaughter. Commander Nicole Grant spoke from the newly commissioned EDS Singularity. Her ship had capabilities that even the other dark matter vessels did not possess. She had volunteered to show the Council exactly how far humanity had pushed this technology. With permission from Admiral Carter, she activated the ship's most powerful and dangerous system. The Singularity's core began drawing massive amounts of dark matter into a concentrated point in space. The reaction created something that should not exist outside the heart of a collapsing star. An artificial black hole formed in front of the ship, and for exactly 4 seconds it hung there in space, bending light and gravity around it. Everything within 1,000 kilometers was pulled toward it, including several Council ships that had to fire their engines at full power to
avoid being dragged in, then Nicole
collapsed the black hole before it could grow out of control. The energy released from the collapse sent a shockwave through space that every ship in both fleets could feel. When the sensors cleared the spot where the black hole had been was empty except for a slight distortion in spacetime that would take weeks to fade. Bexthar's voice came through the communication channel, and he sounded like a broken male. He asked Henry what humanity wanted. The Council could not fight this. They could not defend against weapons that bent reality itself. If Earth wanted to conquer the galaxy, then no one could stop them. 49 species and thousands of warships would fall before even a dozen of these impossible vessels. Henry's response was immediate and firm. Humanity did not want to conquer anyone. Earth had built these ships because they knew the galaxy was a dangerous place full of species that would try to dominate them. The dark matter fleet existed for one purpose only, and that was to ensure humanity's independence. As long as the Council respected Earth's sovereignty, then these weapons would never be used against them. President Helen Morrison appeared on the screen beside Henry and addressed the Council directly. She explained that humanity had spent 2 centuries alone in space, building their civilization without interference from others. They had no desire to join galactic empires or submit to alien laws. Earth would make its own decisions and chart its own course. However, that did not mean humanity wanted to be isolated. Trade and cultural exchange were welcome. Diplomatic relations were encouraged. But political control would never be accepted. Bexthar listened to the human president and slowly nodded his massive head. He had spent his entire life conquering species that he saw as inferior. Now he was faced with a species that could destroy everything he had built, and they were offering peace instead of domination. It was humbling in a way he had never experienced before. He asked what would happen if the Council agreed to leave Earth alone. Henry explained the terms that humanity was offering. The Council would recognize Earth and all human colonies as sovereign territory. No Council laws would apply within human space. In return, humanity would not expand aggressively into Council territory or interfere with Council affairs. Trade agreements could be negotiated between individual species and Earth. Diplomatic embassies could be established, but there would be no political integration and no military alliances. The terms were generous considering humanity held all the advantages. Vexthar knew that many on the Council would see this as a defeat. The proud species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years would have to acknowledge that they had met their match. But the alternative was a war that could destroy countless worlds. He told Henry that he would take the proposal back to the council for consideration. Before the communication ended, Lisa Bennett added one more thing that needed to be said. She wanted the council to understand something important. The 12 dark matter warships they had seen today were just the beginning. Earth had more vessels under construction, many more. If the council chose war instead of peace, then humanity would build a fleet that could protect every human colony across the galaxy. That fleet would be unstoppable. It was not a threat. It was a promise. Captain Daniel Wright watched from the watchtower as the council fleet began to withdraw from Earth's orbit. The alien ships moved slowly and carefully as if afraid that any sudden movement might provoke the human warships into attacking. The massive formation that had arrived with such confidence was now retreating with their metaphorical tails between their legs. Amy Foster let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. She looked at Daniel and asked if he thought the council would accept the terms. Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. He said that the council had two choices. They could accept that humanity was now a major power in the galaxy, or they could try to destroy Earth before it became even stronger. Either way, the galaxy had changed today, and things would never be the same. Karen Price sat in the pilot's chair of the Phantom and felt the neural interface disconnect as she powered down the dark matter drive. Her hands were shaking from the adrenaline and her heart was pounding. She had just participated in the most important military operation in human history. The species that had threatened to conquer Earth had been sent away without a single shot fired in anger. It was a victory, but she knew the real test was still to come. The council fleet jumped away from the solar system and headed back toward their home territories. Aboard the Celestial Authority, Vexithar sat in his command chair and thought about everything he had seen. His career had been built on the assumption that military might determine power in the galaxy. Today he learned that there were levels of might he had never imagined possible. The humans had cracked a secret that had eluded every other species for millions of years. He wondered. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 days after Vexithar returned from Earth, and the atmosphere in the Grand Chamber was tense. Representatives from all 49 member species filled the circular room, and every single one of them had watched the recordings of what happened in the Sol system. The humans had demonstrated technology that should not exist, and now the Council had to decide how to respond. Vexithar stood at the center podium and delivered his report to the assembled representatives. His voice was steady, but everyone could hear the underlying tension when he described how easily the human warships had neutralized his entire fleet. He explained that the 12 vessels had power outputs that exceeded anything in the Council's databases. They could manipulate gravity and time and space itself. Traditional weapons and defenses were completely useless against them. Councillor Thrawn rose from her seat, and her crystalline body chimed softly as she moved. She was one of the oldest beings in the galaxy, and represented a species that had been spacefaring for over 50,000 years. Her voice carried weight when she spoke, and right now she sounded deeply concerned. She reminded everyone that the Kethax Imperium had tried to harness dark matter 10,000 years ago. That experiment had ended with their entire civilization, collapsing when the reactions went out of control and tore apart 3-star systems. The chamber fell, silent as everyone remembered the cautionary tale of the Kethax. Their ruins still drifted through space as a warning about the dangers of pursuing technologies that species were not ready to handle. Yet somehow these humans had succeeded where the mighty Kethax had failed. The question was whether humanity truly understood what they had created, or if they were children playing with a bomb that could destroy the galaxy. On Earth, Admiral Henry Carter sat in a briefing room with President Helen Morrison and the military leadership discussing the same questions from their perspective. They had monitoring stations that could detect Council communications, and right now those stations were picking up a lot of encrypted traffic between Council worlds. The aliens were scared, and fear made civilizations do unpredictable things. Secretary of Defense Paul Martinez pulled up intelligence reports showing increased military activity across Council space. Several species had begun moving their fleets into defensive positions. Others were recalling ships from patrol duties and consolidating their forces. It looked like they were preparing for the possibility of war even though humanity had offered peace. Paul said what everyone was thinking. The Council might decide that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Commander Lisa Bennett agreed with that assessment and added that Earth needed to be ready for either outcome. The dark matter fleet was powerful, but it only had 12 operational ships right now. If the Council threw everything they had at Earth in one massive assault, then humanity would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. She recommended accelerating production on the next batch of warships and establishing defensive perimeters around all human colonies. Lieutenant Karen Price sat in on the meeting through a video link from Station Kepler where the Phantom was undergoing maintenance. She raised a point that made everyone uncomfortable. The Council had seen what the dark matter ships could do, but they did not know the limitations. Right now, the aliens were assuming these vessels were invincible. If humanity revealed weaknesses, then the Council might be encouraged to attack. Therefore, it was critical to maintain the illusion of complete superiority. Dr. Richard Hayes had his own concerns about the situation. He stood in his laboratory surrounded by holographic displays, showing simulations of dark matter reactions. The technology was stable now, but it had taken 50 years and thousands of failed experiments to reach this point. If the Council tried to replicate what humanity had done, they would most likely destroy themselves in the process. That should deter them from attempting it. But Richard knew that desperation made people take stupid risks. He pulled up a new set of schematics that showed a massive structure under construction in deep space far beyond Pluto's orbit. This was Project Forge, and it represented the next phase of humanity's defense strategy. The facility was designed to manufacture dark matter warships at 10 times the speed of current production. Within 2 years, Earth could have 200 vessels. Within 5 years, they could have 1,000. The galaxy would have no choice but to accept humanity as a major power. Back on Centrum Prime, the Council debate had turned heated. War Marshal Crone slammed his armored fist on the table and demanded immediate action. He represented the Drath hegemony, which was one of the most militaristic species in the Council. Crone argued that humanity was a threat that would only grow stronger with time. Today they had 12 ships. Tomorrow they might have hundreds. The Council needed to strike now with overwhelming force before the humans could expand their fleet. Several representatives voiced support for Crone's position. They saw the dark matter technology as an existential threat to the established order. If humanity was allowed to grow unchecked, then eventually they might decide that peace was no longer in their interest. Better to deal with them now while the threat was still manageable. Even if it cost thousands of lives, the long-term security of the galaxy was worth it. But others argued just as passionately against military action. Counselor Mirison represented an aquatic species known for their wisdom and patience. She spoke about the futility of attacking an enemy you could not defeat. The recordings from Vexthar's encounter showed that human weapons could destroy Council ships without even being visible on sensors. How could anyone fight an enemy that could appear and disappear at will while manipulating the laws of physics? Mirison made another point that gave the war faction pause. If the Council attacked Earth and failed, then humanity would have every justification to retaliate. Right now, the humans were offering peace and coexistence. If the Council rejected that offer and tried to exterminate them, then the survivors would have no reason to show mercy. They would build their fleet and they would come for every Council world with vengeance in their hearts. The war that Crone wanted might end with human warships orbiting every major planet in Council space. Thuran spoke again and proposed a middle path. She suggested sending an ambassador to Earth. Not a military delegation, but a genuine diplomatic envoy who could learn more about humanity and their intentions. The Council needed information before making any decisions about war or peace. They needed to understand what kind of species they were dealing with and whether humans could be trusted with the power they possessed. The debate continued for hours with no clear consensus emerging. Some species wanted war. Others wanted peace. Most were simply terrified and unsure what to do. Finally, Vexthar stood again and said something that surprised everyone. He admitted that his encounter with the humans had changed his perspective on many things. For his entire career, he had believed that military power was the only thing that mattered. Now he had met a species that possessed ultimate military power, and they had chosen not to use it. Vexthar described how the human warships could have destroyed his entire fleet in minutes, but instead they had demonstrated their capabilities and offered terms that showed either remarkable restraint or sophisticated strategy. Either way, it suggested that humanity was not the mindless, aggressive species that some feared. Perhaps they truly did just want to be left alone to develop their civilization in peace. Krone stood and challenged Vexthar directly. He accused the High Counselor of being soft and letting fear cloud his judgment. The humans had humiliated Vexthar, and now he was trying to rationalize his defeat by pretending the enemy was noble. Krone said what many were thinking. The humans had shown mercy because they were not ready for a full-scale war yet. They needed time to build more ships. The Council should not give them that time. The vote was called, and it was closer than anyone expected. By a margin of just 3 votes, the Council decided to send an ambassador, rather than launch an immediate attack. However, they also authorized a massive military buildup across all member worlds. If diplomacy failed, then the Council would be ready to throw every ship they had at Earth in one overwhelming assault. It would be the largest military operation in galactic history. The ambassador chosen for the mission was named Lyra, and she was a member of the Varani species. The Varani were known throughout the galaxy for their empathic abilities and diplomatic skills. Lyra could sense emotions and intentions through a form of telepathy that made lying to her nearly impossible. If anyone could determine humanity's true nature, it would be her. She accepted the assignment, knowing it might be the most important diplomatic mission in Council history. President Morrison received a notification that the Council was sending an ambassador, and she immediately began preparations to receive Lyra with full honors. This was humanity's chance to prove they could be trusted. Helen knew that everything depended on making a good impression. If the ambassador returned to the Council with a positive report, then peace was possible. If she reported that humans were dangerous or deceptive, then war would be inevitable. Admiral Henry Carter met with his staff to discuss security arrangements for the ambassador's visit. They would show Lyra almost everything about the Dark Maw. Ambassador Lyra's ship arrived at Earth 3 weeks after the Council made their decision, and she came alone in a small, unarmed vessel painted white to signal peaceful intentions. Admiral Henry Carter met her personally at the docking bay of Orbital Station Freedom and extended his hand in the traditional human greeting. Lyra studied him with large golden eyes that seemed to see more than just his physical form. As an empath, she could sense the emotions flowing from every person around her, and right now she felt caution mixed with genuine hope. Henry welcomed her to Earth and promised that she would have complete access to anything she wanted to see. Lyra thanked him and said that the Council was very curious about humanity, the species that had accomplished something impossible, and then offered peace instead of conquest. She admitted that most Council members did not understand humans at all, and that was why she was here, to learn the truth about what kind of civilization Earth represented. Over the next several days, Lyra toured Earth cities and met with scientists and politicians and ordinary citizens. She visited universities where human students studied physics and art and philosophy. She walked through markets where people bought food and clothing and argued about prices. She sat in parks and watched children play while their parents relaxed in the sunshine. Everything she saw suggested a civilization that valued knowledge and creativity and family. But Lyra also visited the military facilities because she needed to understand the other side of humanity. She toured the shipyards where conventional warships were built and spoke with Admiral Carter about Earth's defense strategy. Henry was remarkably open about everything. He showed her tactical simulations and explained how humanity had prepared for the possibility of alien contact. They had always known the galaxy might be hostile, so they built weapons to protect themselves. Dr. Richard Hayes gave Lyra a personal tour of Station Kepler and explained the 50-year journey that led to the creation of dark matter technology. He showed her the early failed experiments that had killed several researchers. He explained how each failure taught them something new, until finally they achieved stable reactions. Richard's emotions were easy for Lyra to read. Pride in what his team had accomplished mixed with sadness for those who died making it possible. Lyra asked Richard the question that everyone on the Council wanted answered. Why show her all of this? Why reveal capabilities and limitations that would help the Council develop countermeasures? Richard smiled and told her that transparency was a choice humanity had made deliberately. They could hide their technology and maintain mystery, but that would only increase fear and suspicion. Better to show the truth and let the Council see that humans understood the responsibility that came with such power, the Real test came when President Helen Morrison invited Lyra to observe a full-tier military exercise in the outer solar system. All 20 dark matter warships would participate, including 8 new vessels that had been completed since the Council's first visit. Lyra agreed to observe, and she was taken aboard the Phantom, where Commander Karen Price greeted her warmly. Karen had been nervous about meeting the ambassador, but Lyra's calm presence put her at ease. The exercise began with all 20 ships demonstrating their basic capabilities. They phased between dimensions, appearing and disappearing across millions of kilometers in seconds. They created gravitational fields that bent light and twisted space. They generated temporal distortion bubbles that slowed time to a crawl inside their radius. Every demonstration was more impressive than the last, and Lyra watched in silent awe. Captain Jason Blake commanded the EDS Revenant, and he showed Lyra something that even the other human captains found disturbing. His ship created a stasis field that completely froze a target area in time. Everything inside that bubble stopped moving at the quantum level. Molecules ceased vibrating. Electrons stopped orbiting their nuclei. It was like hitting a pause button on reality itself, and Blake could maintain the field for up to 30 seconds before the power requirements became dangerous. But the most shocking demonstration came from Commander Nicole Grant aboard the EDS Singularity. Nicole had volunteered to show the Council's ambassador exactly how far humanity had pushed the boundaries of physics. With clearance from Admiral Carter, she activated the ship's Singularity core and began drawing massive amounts of dark matter into a single point in space. The reaction created an artificial black hole that hung in the void like a wound in reality. For exactly 4 seconds it existed, pulling everything nearby toward its event horizon. The gravitational pull was so intense that light itself bent invisible curves around the Singularity. Then Nicole collapsed the reaction in a controlled implosion that released a shockwave of energy across the entire solar system. When the sensors cleared, Lyra sat in stunned silence. Karen asked if she was all right, and the ambassador nodded slowly. She said that she had just witnessed something that should be impossible. Humanity had learned to create and destroy miniature black holes at will. That level of power was beyond anything the Council had imagined. She asked how many ships could do what the Singularity just did. Karen answered honestly and told her that right. Now only the Singularity had that capability, but the technology would be installed in all new vessels going forward. Within a year, Earth would have 30 ships that could create artificial singularities. Within 2 years, they would have 100. The implication was clear. Humanity's power would only continue to grow. Lyra returned to her quarters that evening and spent hours composing her report to the Council. She described everything she had seen and felt during her time on Earth. The humans were not monsters or conquerors. They were explorers and builders who had developed devastating weapons because they feared being conquered by others. Their technology was real and terrifying, but it was controlled by people who understood its dangers. 3 days later, Lyra stood before the full Council assembly on Centrum Prime and delivered her report in person. She showed recordings of the military exercises and sensor data that confirmed everything Vexithar had reported. For an hour, she described what she had witnessed and answered questions from the representatives. When she finished, the chamber fell into complete silence. Councillor Theron finally spoke, and her crystalline voice carried a mixture of wonder and concern. She asked if Lyra believed humanity could be trusted with such power. The ambassador took a long moment before answering. She said that the humans had chosen exploration over conquest. Even though conquest would be easier, they had offered peace even though they could demand submission. That choice revealed their character more than any words could. War Marshal Crone stood, and his voice was harsh when he challenged Lyra's assessment. He said that today the humans offered peace, but tomorrow they might change their minds. Once they had enough ships, they could enforce their will on the entire galaxy, and no one could stop them. The Council needed to act now before it was too late. He called for an immediate vote to authorize a full-scale military assault on Earth. But Vexthar rose and faced Crone directly. The High Counselor said that he had made a mistake when he went to Earth expecting to find primitives ready to submit. He had learned a hard lesson about judging others based on assumptions. The humans had shown remarkable restraint when they could have destroyed his entire fleet. That restraint deserved to be acknowledged and respected. He would not vote for a war that would cost millions of lives and might still fail. Mirazin added her voice to Vexthar's and reminded the Council that they had 2 paths before them. They could fear humanity and start a war they might not win, or they could accept humans as equals and hope that mutual respect would prevent future conflicts. She knew which path her species would choose, and she urged others to consider carefully before voting for extinction over coexistence. The debate lasted for hours, but eventually, the vote was called. By a larger margin than before, the Council decided to recognize humanity as a sovereign power. They would not interfere in human territory, and they would invite Earth to establish formal diplomatic relations. Some species voted against the measure, and War Marshal Crone stormed out of the chamber in anger. But the majority had spoken. Lyra was given the honor of delivering the news to President Morrison personally. She returned to Earth and met with Helen in the Oval Office. The ambassador formally announced that the Galactic Council recognized Earth and all human colonies as independent sovereign territory. No council laws would apply in human space. Trade and diplomatic relations were welcomed, but political integration would not be required or expected. Helen thanked Lyra and said that humanity looked forward to peaceful cooperation with the Council and its member species. Earth would not expand aggressively, but they would explore new star systems and establish colonies where they chose. Any conflicts could be resolved through diplomatic channels. Both sides would benefit from this arrangement far more than they would from war. That night, Commander Karen Price sat in the pilot seat of the Phantom on routine patrol of the outer solar system. She received a private message from Admiral Carter, congratulating her and all the other captains on their professionalism during the ambassador's visit. Henry told her that they had proven something important today. Power did not have to corrupt. Strength